Now, in our 25th year, a quarter of a century of service to the worldwide amateur radio community, we are This Week in Amateur Radio, your all-amateur radio and technology news, magazine, and bulletin service of the air. This is edition number 1337, with a release and air date of Saturday, October 12th, 2024. Please take the program to your air following the cue tone. On the amateur radio bands around the world and streaming on the internet since 1993, serving the amateur radio community with weekly, reliable amateur radio news and special features, we are This Week in Amateur Radio, the premier amateur radio and technology news, magazine, and bulletin service of the air. Here are the stories for release around the earth as we come to air with edition number 1337 of This Week in Amateur Radio. Amateurs continue to serve as Hurricane Milton comes ashore and crosses the state of Florida. Broadcasters receive federal funding to strengthen their resiliency during storms and hurricanes. VOA, the Voice of America, is moving into new headquarters in Washington, D.C. The Australian federal government hires a firm in the US to run a new undersea cable. The University of Scranton will be dedicating its new state-of-the-art amateur radio station. Starlink Internet takes an unauthorized voyage aboard a Navy ship. We will have the details. Scientists at NASA turn off Voyager 2's plasma spectrometer in a power-saving measure. Meanwhile, others at NASA are preparing a mission to Jupiter's icy moon, Europa. The application period for the next round of ARRL Foundation grants is now open. The FCC greenlights Starlink satellites to provide direct-to-device cell service to areas hit by the recent hurricanes. We will have this month's volunteer monitoring report, and we'll tell you how you can participate in this year's Sasquatch Awareness Day in this week's report. These headline stories will come to you in a moment, along with this week's special features. We'll visit with Bruce Page, KK5DO, and get an update from AMSAT and what's new with all those amateur satellites in orbit. Australia's own Onno Benschop, VK6FLAB, and Foundations of Amateur Radio will answer the question, what does an actual minimal setup look like? Our own amateur radio historian Will Rogers, K5WLR, returns with yet another edition of A Century of Amateur Radio. This week, we all pile into the Wayback Machine, as Will takes us back to the beginnings of amateur radio, as the causes for QRM were well understood as being mostly man-made and could be dealt with through cooperation and tuning techniques. Other disruptive on-air phenomena were clearly beyond such controls. We will learn all about it in this new edition entitled Strangely Behaving Signals. And we will stop by and visit with Bill Saliers, AJ8B, in the DX Corner, with all the latest news on upcoming and active DX expeditions, DX, upcoming radio sport contests, and more. That's all straight ahead, as North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service, This Week in Amateur Radio, takes to the air right now. Reporting from our headquarters studio just outside Albany, New York, where it is turning real chilly, this is W2XBS.
And reporting this week from my humble shack in Cortlandville, New York, where the resident feline will not stay off my keyboard, I'm Chris Perrine, KB2FAF.
And reporting from our news bureau just outside Albany, New York, in the Geek Cave studios, I'm Rich Lawrence, KB2MOB.
And reporting from our news bureau in Rochester, New York, I'm Dave Wilson, WA2HOY.
And reporting from our news bureau in Knoxville, Tennessee, where my wife and I just welcomed newborn twin boys, I'm Josh Marler, AA4WX.
And reporting from our Troy, New York News Bureau, where we're just at peak foliage viewing season, I'm Eric, KD2, RJX.
Reporting live from our news bureau in western Massachusetts, where the trees have donned their finest fall attire. So grab your hot cider and enjoy the vibrant hues. I'm Marvin Turner, W0MET.
And reporting from our amateur radio outpost in the Catskill Mountains of upstate New York, where the frost is on the pumpkin just about every morning now, I'm Don Hulick, K2ATJ.
And reporting from our news bureau in Fayetteville, Arkansas, where we're all wondering, where did autumn go? I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR.
And now, with this week's lead story, here's our own Chris Perrine, KB2FAF.
Leading off our news this week, while emergency communications were still continuing in the wake of Hurricane Helene's impact on the southeastern United States, hams in Florida had to begin their own activation for Hurricane Milton on Wednesday, October 9th. With more details on this story, we go to John Ross, KD8IDJ, who files this special report.
As Hurricane Milton moved across Florida, amateur radio operators volunteering through the Amateur Radio Emergency Service, ARES, were stationed in the State Emergency Operations Center in county EOCs and at designated shelters in local communities. The volunteers utilized the Amateur Radio Service to provide a communications link that works when all else fails. Florida has a robust ham radio communications network called SARNet that serves as the official link between EOCs during a storm. SARNet has been placed in a restricted net condition to ensure traffic could flow as needed. In times of crisis, the net is limited for agency and EOC emergency traffic only. The state of Florida provides the network microwave backbone between individually owned repeaters. ARRL's Director of Emergency Management, Josh Johnson, KE5MHV, says the radio amateurs in Florida are well prepared. Florida hams have a lot of experience in emergency communications. They are well trained and have the necessary infrastructure and support from the state to serve, he said. Across the country, ham radio operators participated in several nets to assist the National Hurricane Center with gathering surface information about the storm. The Hurricane Watch Net and the VoIP Hurricane Net were both active. At the NHC, volunteer operators monitored each of these ham radio communications methods from a special station at the center, WX4 NHC. Stan Broadway, N8BHL, assistant manager of the Hurricane Watch Net, reports that the net has concluded operation for Hurricane Milton. The net launched a 6-hour preparatory session on October 8, 2024, to log stations anticipating the storm. When they began monitoring on October 9th of 2024 to collect storm data as Milton approached the Gulf Coast of Florida, said Broadway. Overall, the net was in operation for 33 hours, operating on 7.268 megahertz and 14.325 megahertz as propagation allowed. Net sessions were very busy with reports which were forwarded to the National Hurricane Center. As always, we offer our thanks to nets and operators who stood aside to allow us a clear frequency. Our prayers are with those who suffered damage and loss from the storm, said Broadway. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
Rob Macedo, KD1CY, Director of Operations for the VoIP Hurricane Net, said the net secured on Thursday, October 10th at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. Informal system monitoring occurred through Thursday evening. Also a reminder that due to the lengthy and overnight activation of the VoIP Hurricane Net for Major Hurricane Milton, the VoIP Hurricane Prep Net for Saturday, October 12th is canceled. We wish to thank the reporting stations and our net controls for their support during the activation that spanned 22 hours, he said.
As we come to air this week, public radio and TV stations are getting an extra dose of federal funds to strengthen their ability to operate during disasters. With disaster resiliency on almost everyone's mind in the United States, the Federal Emergency Management Agency has made an additional $40 million available to public radio and TV stations to permit them to upgrade their infrastructure. The money is being released through the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. The funds are designed to permit radio stations investments in new transmitters, generators, backup power supplies, antennas, and related equipment for handling emergency messages. The equipment is capable of handling messages through the federal agency's integrated public alert and warning system and its common alerting protocol. For TV stations, the funds are to support training their personnel in the use of the new or upgraded equipment. According to the article in trade publication Radio World, FEMA has already released 2 rounds of funding to public broadcasters. This third round will mean that $136 million has been spent during the course of 3 fiscal years to assist public media's capabilities during disasters.
Now, in our 25th year of service to the worldwide amateur radio community, you are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio.
The ARRL Foundation is now accepting grant applications through October 31st, 2024. And for all the details, we go to John Ross, KD8 IDJ.
There is funding available to organizations for eligible amateur radio-related projects and initiatives, particularly those with a focus on educating, licensing, and supporting amateur radio activities. Youth-based projects and initiatives are especially encouraged. The ARRL Foundation Grants Program accepts proposals 3 times a year, in February, June, and October. Awardees are notified approximately 1 month after the closing of each cycle. Recently, the ARRL Foundation provided funding for instructional materials to the Montgomery Amateur Radio Club, MARC, in Montgomery County, Maryland. MARC, led by David Byrne, W2LNX, and John O'Brien, K3LO, held a Radio Merit Badge program on Saturday, June 22, 2024, at the MARC Damascus Emergency Communications Team, DECT, Field Day site. The program provided scouts an opportunity to earn the Radio Merit Badge by completing requirements, which included conducting a QSO. There were 3 amateur radio HF stations and 1 VHF FM station on site, and another HF station in the MARC Emergency Communications trailer. Members explained how the stations worked and mentored the scouts as they made the QSOs. A total of 58 scouts completed all requirements for the Radio Merit Badge. The ARRL Foundation carefully manages a portfolio of endowments in which donors have provided specific goals for their gifts, and that portfolio is invested and managed so it can continue to support those goals for many years to come. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
Additional information and a link to the grant application form can be found at www.arrl.org/amateur-radio-grants.
For 70 years, it's been based on its current location, almost in the shadow of the U.S. Capitol. And now the Voice of America's parent, the U.S. Agency for Global Media, has awarded a new lease establishing 1875 Pennsylvania Avenue, Northwest, as its own future headquarters, the home of the Voice of America. The new location is 3 blocks from the White House in the neighborhood of George Washington University. The agency's move to a modern facility will save taxpayers more than $150 million over the course of the 15-year lease, the organization said in a press release. The relocation will begin in the coming months and occur in phases over the next several years.
The Australian federal government has handed $51 million to U.S. firm Manta Ray Solutions, LLC, to develop a new Pacific subsea cable. Forming part of Google's Central Pacific Connect initiative, the cable will land at Funafuti, Tuvalu, marking the island's first undersea telecommunications cable. The Tuvalu cable system contract will run until March 31, 2027, while the project is managed by the Australian Infrastructure Financing Facility for the Pacific. Last year, Google was tapped to deploy 2 trans-Pacific subsea cables between the United States and Australia via Fiji and French Polynesia.
On Friday, October 25th, 2024, the University of Scranton will dedicate a state-of-the-art amateur radio station that serves students in the university's W3 USR Amateur Radio Club. The station is used for physics courses and research by students and faculty participating with the Ham Radio Science Citizen Investigation, or HAMSCI project led by Nathaniel Frizzle, Ph.D., W2NAF, Associate Professor of Physics and Engineering at Scranton. Research conducted using the facility has been supported by grants from the National Science Foundation, NASA, the Amateur Radio Digital Communications Foundation, and other organizations. Located on the 5th floor of the Loyola Science Center, the main station has floor-to-ceiling glass walls with sweeping views of the city of Scranton. Last academic year, a 40-foot tower with HF antenna for 14, 21, and 28 megahertz, as well as VHF and UHF satellite and microwave antennas, some with rotating mounts, were installed in addition to heavy-duty controllers, all-mode transceivers, speakers, desktop microphones, and other components. A public dedication ceremony, station open house, and ticketed buffet dinner are planned. More information is available at scranton.edu/W3USR-dedication.
In 2018, the Piedmont Amateur Radio Club, PARC, an ARRL affiliated club, launched an ambitious program to provide emergency communication following interruptions in power and internet during disasters in central Georgia and the southeast. WinLink was chosen as the principal mode of communication, and PARC was authorized to set up 6 WinLink gateways perched atop the Georgia Fall Line, which is the geological boundary between the Piedmont and coastal plain areas of the state. With some timely advertising, Amateur Radio Emergency Service, Aries Club members along the coast were encouraged to listen, pick their strongest gateway channel, and save it to the WinLink Express favorites. Why? Well, during a hurricane, it's just not time to update the propagation estimates for the channels. This year, PARC service was further improved when the club pointed its 40-meter beam antenna towards the predicted landfall of a hurricane. And right on cue, this year's hurricane season resulted in considerable WinLink traffic and put an even greater load on PARC's 6 gateways. During Hurricane Helene, one local hospital activated its ECOM station, donated by PARC. The regional coordinating hospital and local club members off-site began monitoring that frequency and were prepared to pass traffic. With the help of a generous grant from the ARRL Foundation, PARC also constructed a remote satellite station. The initial concept was to use the satellite station for recruitment, but the capability it offers has been so surprising that the club opted to find a way to incorporate a satellite station into its strategy for emergency communication during a disaster. The recent popularity in satellite communication, coupled with the natural appeal of space to a younger audience, could mean more energy and efficient traffic and fresh ideas on emergency communications. In establishing the programs, PARC has been most fortunate to have had help from organizations like ARRL, Aries, and WinLink and their members. The technology is complex. PARC is a volunteer-based organization. Capital is hard to come by, and the hours invested in building and maintaining ECOM systems may not always be appreciated. But PARC members are appreciative of any help from the ham community, especially help that keeps us from having to reinvent the wheel while serving an even larger population. And thanks to Larry Gage, Piedmont Amateur Radio Club, for providing information for this story.
A dramatic early morning weather balloon launch on Saturday, October 12th, is scheduled to lift a series of CubeSats into a near-space environment above South Africa, as hams follow and track the balloon from locations as far away as possible. The hams were encouraged to use the various payloads, which included crossband repeaters, LoRa and APRS trackers, parrot repeaters, whisper beacons, and SSTV payloads. The CubeSats remain aloft until the hydrogen-filled balloon bursts, and then they parachute back to Earth. The launch at the model airstrip near Secunda, coordinated by the Secunda Radio Club, ZS6 SRC, is known as BACAR 12. The acronym stands for Balloon Carrying Amateur Radio.
If you've ever operated an amateur radio station remotely via the internet, you have Keith LaMonica, W7DXX, to thank. The former broadcaster, who was the recipient of numerous awards, including the noted Peabody Award, was perhaps best known among hams for working with another amateur, Bob Arnold, N2JEU, to establish an internet-controlled base for amateur radio, enabling the radio operators without antennas to get on the air remotely with computers. This groundbreaking station was profiled in a 1999 article in CQ magazine. Both Keith and Bob were inducted into CQ's Hall of Fame in 2016. Keith died on Thursday, September 26th, following a serious illness, according to a notice on QRZ.com. His accomplishments as a ham started very early on in his life, when he made front page news in the local California newspaper for being the first person in the area to hear radio transmissions being sent by the Soviet satellite Sputnik. A satellite enthusiast, he developed the satellite radio talk show as a format, creating a program known as FM America. He also hosted a Sun Broadcast Network radio talk show. His long professional career in radio and TV had him crisscrossing the U.S. markets from the East Coast to the West Coast. The Peabody Award was presented to him for his coverage of the trial of James Earl Ray, who was convicted of the assassination of the U.S. civil rights leader Martin Luther King Jr. in 1968. Keith was 81.
You're listening to North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine of the air. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, distributed worldwide at twiar.net.
It is time for this month's Volunteer Monitoring Report. The Volunteer Monitor Program is a joint initiative between a RRL and the FCC to enhance compliance in the amateur radio service. This is the August 2024 activity report of the VM program. Licensees in New York, Virginia, and Georgia were issued advisory notices concerning excessively wide signals and splattering, resulting in interference to communications on 14.300 MHz. The Virginia and Georgia stations were also cautioned that the issue would have to be resolved before their licenses would be renewed. A licensee in Pennsylvania received an advisory notice concerning one-way transmissions and deliberate interference to field day operations on 7.200 MHz. A licensee in Georgia received an advisory notice for deliberate interference to the Jarvis Island-N5JD Expedition operating CW on 3.527 MHz. An operator in California received an advisory notice concerning operation of a beacon on 28.244 MHz under an expired license. A licensee in Virginia received an advisory notice concerning deliberate interference on 3.933 MHz and was cautioned that the matter would have to be resolved before his license would be renewed. A technician class licensee in Georgia received an advisory notice concerning single sideband operation on 40 meters. Technicians have no voice privileges on 40 meters. A licensee in Georgia received an advisory notice about causing deliberate interference to a DX station while he was acting as a net control station on 14.290 MHz. A good operator commendation was issued to a licensee in Illinois for exemplary operation on a 2-meter repeater, assisting new licensees with operating procedures and explaining special event stations. A volunteer monitor alert was issued on August 6 for interference from an experimental high-speed stock trading station on 20 meters. Information gathered from the alert resulted in an FCC referral. The VM program administrator participated in one FCC meeting. The totals for July 2024 monitoring were 1,516 hours on HF frequencies and 2,857 hours on VHF frequencies and above, for a total of 4,373 hours. Thanks to Volunteer Monitor Program Administrator Riley Hollingsworth, K4ZDH, for this report.
Come work us as we take to the HF bands in just a few days starting October 16th through the 29th in the Republic of Vanuatu. Vanuatu is currently number 87 in Club Log's Most Wanted list. Planning for this D-Expedition started in 2022 with plans to concentrate on single sideband and to participate in the 2024 CQ Worldwide Single Sideband Contest on October 26th and 27th. We will be participating as a high-power M2 designation using the call sign YJ0VV. We will be using 2 stations and a variety antennas to cover 160 to 6 meters, from a Buddy Hex to a D-Expedition Commander Expedition and various others. Keep an eye on the POTA and IOTA trackers from October 16th to the 29th, as Vanuatu has a couple of parks and we will have a team attempting to activate them as well. For more information, visit our webpage at bit.ly/N4VGE. Again, that's bit.ly/N4VGE.
We have an amateur radio rescue story this week, courtesy of Don Gardner, W7PJ, the ARRL Idaho Section Emergency Coordinator. On the evening of September 21st, Greg Owen, WX7Z, heard an amateur radio frequency call on the VHF zone known as the National Simplex Calling Frequency, 146.52 megahertz. Ed Clark, K7ELC, was calling to get medical help for a 51-year-old man who'd rolled over his four-wheeler. Mac McIntosh, W7ENZ, found the accident and the injured man near his property, and there wasn't any cell phone service. McIntosh had given his handheld radio to Clark to make the call for help when he gave aid to an injured man. The injuries were serious: head trauma, broken collarbone, ribs, and difficulty breathing. Owen called 911 to request help. An ambulance, life flight helicopter, and law enforcement were dispatched to the location, which was 35 minutes outside of Orofino, Idaho. Meanwhile, Owen continued using the amateur radio to relay updates to the dispatcher. The injured man was transported to the hospital via life flight, and last report was recovering. Gardner said hams in the Idaho support area of an old national program called Wilderness Protocol, which encourages the use of National Simplex Calling Frequency of 146.52 megahertz. As amateur radio operators, we train to be available to help when help is needed. The more ham radio operators listen to the radio, the more chance there is someone will be listening to take your emergency call. This is something that's been used many times throughout this country and here in Idaho, he said. There's another incredible story to share.
In a recent episode of This Week in Tech, host Ian Thompson dove into a controversial topic that has been making waves in both military and tech circles: the secret installation of a Starlink antenna on a U.S. Navy warship. The story reveals that certain officers on a U.S. Navy warship took matters into their own hands when they found the official Navy Wi-Fi inadequate. In a move reminiscent of early Wi-Fi days in corporate settings, these officers secretly installed a Starlink antenna and concealed it from the ship's captain. This unauthorized action has likely left a significant blemish on the captain's record and raised serious questions about naval security protocols. Mike Elgin, a tech columnist and digital nomad, expressed concerns about the security implications of this incident. He drew parallels to past situations where consumer technologies were exploited by adversaries to track troop movements. Elgin cited a previous incident where Strava data inadvertently revealed the locations of secret special forces bases in Afghanistan. Clearly a horrible, horrible idea, Elgin stated, emphasizing the potential risks of using unsanctioned communication systems on military vessels. Emily Drebelbus, senior reporter at PC Magazine, pointed out that this incident highlights a larger issue: the growing technological gap between the U.S. military and the private sector. How do we pay so much in taxes and so much money goes to this organization and they can't get secure, high-speed internet for their ships, for their people? She noted that while the military was once at the forefront of technological innovation, Silicon Valley has now taken the lead. The discussion also touched on the human aspect of the issue. The panelists acknowledged the challenging living conditions for sailors, especially those serving on submarines or below deck on surface ships. Most sailors don't go to the above deck for most of their deployment. It's miserable. It's like being in an underground bunker or something like that, Elgin explained, highlighting the importance of internet access for morale and quality of life. In an interesting twist, it was revealed that the U.S. Navy is officially testing Starlink for potential use. This adds a layer of irony to the situation, as sailors are being punished for unauthorized use of a system that the Navy itself is considering adopting. It is hard to dispute that Starlink's influence has been growing globally. Mike Elgin noted that Starlink now owns about 2/3 of all satellites in Earth orbit, demonstrating the company's dominant position in the satellite internet market. The secret Starlink installation on a U.S. Navy ship has opened up a Pandora's box of issues, from military technological capabilities to personal welfare and global corporate influence. When it comes to war, defense, and oceanic operations, how much should the United States be leaning on Elon Musk companies? As the U.S. Navy grapples with these challenges, it's clear that the intersection of cutting-edge technology and military operations will continue to be an evolving landscape. We thank Leo Laporte and Twit for the use of this article.
The Federal Communications Commission gave Starlink and T-Mobile emergency authority to provide satellite-to-phone coverage in areas hit by Hurricane Helene. SpaceX and T-Mobile have been given emergency special temporary authority to enable Starlink satellites with direct-to-cell capability to provide coverage for cell phones in the affected areas of Helene. SpaceX said yesterday the satellites have already been enabled and started broadcasting emergency alerts to cell phones on all networks in North Carolina. In addition, we may test basic SMS texting capability for most cell phones on the T-Mobile network in North Carolina. SpaceX warned of limits since the service isn't ready for commercial rollout yet. SpaceX's direct-to-cell constellation has not been fully deployed, so all services to be delivered will be on a best-effort basis, the company said. Starlink is being used to provide wireless emergency alerts to cell phones from all carriers in North Carolina, according to Ben Longmire, Senior Director of Satellite Engineering for SpaceX. We are closely monitoring Hurricane Milton and standing by ready to take action in Florida, he wrote. The FCC said the approval enables SpaceX to operate supplemental coverage from space in the 1910 to 1915 megahertz and 1990 to 1995 megahertz band, which are leased from T-Mobile in areas affected by the Hurricane Helene. An FCC spokesperson said that the approval is for all areas affected by Helene, although it's only active in North Carolina so far. The FCC also said that it's granting special temporary authorities to licensees and issuing rule waivers to help communications providers maintain and restore service, support emergency operations, and assist in public safety, including search and rescue efforts. Separately, the FCC last week waived certain Lifeline program eligibility rules to help people in the disaster area apply for discount phone and broadband service. SpaceX began launching satellites with direct-to-cell applications in January of 2024 and showed a demo of text messages sent between T-Mobile phones via one of Starlink's low Earth orbit satellites. T-Mobile has said the Starlink service for phones will help cover gaps in areas where it has no coverage due to terrain limitations, land use restriction, and other factors.
Now celebrating our 25th year keeping the amateur radio community around the world informed, you are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available worldwide as a podcast from our web at twiar.net. Coming up, This Week in Amateur Radio is presenting another chapter of A Century of Amateur Radio, Hams, Organizations, Events, Inventions, from the mind of Chris Cordella, W2PA, and his editing team. Each episode will bring a different aspect of early amateur radio history, here on This Week in Amateur Radio.
Hello and welcome to the DX Corner for your weekly dose of DX. I'm Bill, AJ8B. I received several excellent emails the past weeks asking about different techniques for working DX. We've discussed tail ending, timing, and calling slightly off frequency. However, there is one technique that works in all situations: careful listening. I've been able to interview almost 70 DXers from around the world for our club newsletter, and you can reach the club newsletters by going to swodxa.org/newsletters. One of the questions that I always ask is, what does it take for me to break your pile up? The overwhelming number one answer is, listen. Here are a couple examples. You ever heard someone break a pile up or a small crowd during a contest only to have them say, what is your call? Or, you are 5'9", very strong. Please repeat your call slowly. Were these guys not listening? Of course, there is the DX station that says, up 5, and several folks still call on frequency. Whether that is because they're not listening, they don't know what it means, or they don't know how to tune their rig really doesn't matter. The best example comes from my friend Joe, WAGEX. Joe was trying to work Scarborough Reef years ago, and the operator was saying 14150 up 20, and was having no luck. However, at one point, he heard the operator say 250. Joe was not sure what he meant, but he moved to 14.250 and gave his call once. He worked Scarborough Reef with one call. Turns out that was the only time he worked him, but he did get him because he listened. There's a huge lesson there. Next week, we can discuss an index card trick that you can use, and I'll share that with you. Often people will ask me if there's a written copy of the information that I present. There are so many call signs, dates, and URLs being discussed that you could never remember them until such time as you could write them down. I use most of the same data that you hear in this DX Corner for the weekly DX column in the Ohio Section Journal. If you just Google ARRL Ohio Section, you will find the Ohio Section website, and you can subscribe to the weekly journal and get most of this information. The actual website is arrl-ohio.org. This is a free journal, and you don't need to be an ARL member to receive it. You won't get the well-rounded information that you get from the This Week in Amateur Radio podcast, but you will get the majority of my DX information. So speaking of DX, here's what's happening in the world of DX. This section of DX News comes from Bernie, W3UR, editor of the Daily DX, the Weekly DX, and the How's DX column in QST. If you would like a free 2-week trial of the Daily DX, your only source of real-time DX information, just drop me a note at thedxmentor@gmail.com. Let's get started with a potential change in the sovereignty of the Chagos Islands, also known as VQ9. Reuters, the British Broadcasting Corporation, the Washington Post, and other media outlets reported this week that the United Kingdom is transferring its last African colony, the Chagos Islands, to Mauritius. According to the Washington Post, the Chagos Islands, also known as the British Indian Ocean Territory, are a cluster of islands in the Indian Ocean. They include Diego Garcia, the largest of the islands and the site of a strategically positioned military base. Among the reasons for the long-running dispute over the archipelago is a decision by Britain, along with the U.S., to evict thousands of indigenous inhabitants to make way for the base's construction. From an amateur radio standpoint, this could result in changes in the Chagos Islands DXCC status. As I hear more information on that, I will pass it along. DH5FS Fred will be active as Fox Oscar stroke DH5SS from the French Polynesian Islands. He will operate 20 through 10 CW and FT8. You can QSL his home call. Harald DF2WO is QRV from Kigali, Rwanda, is 9X2 Alpha Whiskey until October 23rd. He will have a Yaesu 991A, a multi-band dipole, a bamboo hex beam, as well as others, and a 6-meter antenna. The C-21MM DXpedition departure date for Nauru is fast approaching. They expect limited operation on the high bands initially. Full operation with 5 stations on the air 24/7 will begin October 15th in the evening. They will pay special attention to their sunrise and sunset times for low band openings. The team is grateful for the generous donations from early supporters. Their QSL manager has received the LOTW certificate for C21MM, and QSLs and LOTW confirmations will be sent out after their return in November. News and pictures will be published on their website, and of course, I'll give you updates, tips, and hints to work them. The 3 Delta II Victor DXpedition to Rotuma has begun, and their first logs have been uploaded to Club Log. Target frequencies are listed on the 3 Delta II Victor QRZ page. We have an update on ZD9, Tristan da Cunha and Gulf Islands. W7GJ, Lance, is not sure when his ship will leave Tristan, so he has set up a low dipole in the front of his QTH. He says that, quote, it will be interesting to see if it works at all, end quote. One day it was windy but not raining, so he hiked up to the top of a lava flow of a volcano that erupted in 1961. Lance has decided to stay an additional 2.5 weeks and hopes to leave on the MFV Edinburgh on October 27th. He is rebuilding the 6-meter antenna and station, hoping to work some TEP and maybe some F2 until EME conditions are good. So good luck, Lance. IK7WL, Antonio, has received his 5 Victor Zero DX license for Togo, which is valid for 4 years. He plans to use this call during his humanitarian missions in Togo. He is looking at going to 5 Victor in the January to February 2025 timeframe. Antonio will be looking for sponsors to try to help children less fortunate than ours, he said. He also seeks sponsors for QSLs and transport of radio material. You can contact Antonio, IK7WUL, for more details. 7 Quebec 8 Alpha Charlie is the newly licensed Arnold Chawanga from Malawi, thanks to the efforts of the Washington, D.C. based HACDC Amateur Radio Club and to K6ZO, Don. Arnold began operations earlier this week on 6 meters, working into Europe. It is believed that he holds the first ever 7 Quebec 8 call sign. JE1JKL will be QRV from Labuan, East Malaysia from October 23rd to November 25th. He will be in the CQ Worldwide DX contest, single sideband, as 9 Mike 6 North America in the single op all band low power category, and in the CQ Worldwide DX contest, CW single op all band high power category. 2 Japanese hams will be operating Zulu Delta 7 SFU and Zulu Delta 7 Golf, respectively, from the rental shack of ZD7 CTO Derek on St. Helena Island from November 2nd to the 22nd. They will have an ICOM IC7300, and their activity will be on FT8, single sideband, and CW. Listen for them on 1.8 through 28, mostly on FT8 and Fox and Hound, with some sideband and slow CW. They say, if you are not sure if the QSO is finished with our 73s, please check Club Log. Then if you cannot find your QSO data, please try again. QSOs will be uploaded to Club Log from time to time. When they return home, they will upload all QSOs to LOTW. G3XTT Don and G3XAQ Alan plan to return to Uganda next month. Finally, Don has received his 5 X-Ray 1 Delta Fox call, which he applied for in May. Alan will use his already issued 5 X-Ray 1 X-Ray Alpha call. They will be there from November 13th to the 27th. However, their emphasis will be to participate in the CQ Worldwide DX CW contest. Don is planning to do 40 meters single band, while Alan will probably be single band on 15 or 10. Quote, no doubt we will be a QRV prior to the contest on various bands, CW in Alan's case, and CW and probably some FT8 in my case, reports Don. The Uruguay DX group has an upcoming operation, Charlie 91 Bravo Victor, October 17th to the 24th, from Mozambique. They plan CW, RIDI, sideband, and FT8. Challenges for this new one have been getting authorization to operate, expensive visas, yellow fever vaccine certificates, arranging for hotels and transportation. Operation will be, quote, vacation style with 2 100-watt stations, Moxon antennas for 17, 12, and 12, and a multi-band spider beam. They plan to get on 28-400 daily at 1300 Zulu to talk to friends back home in Uruguay. If you are someone who likes podcasts and or YouTube episodes, the DX Mentor has 2 new podcast YouTube segments to review. The first is with the C21 MMD expedition headed to Nauru. We just heard about them. The second is the group headed to Vanuatu as YJ0VV. Check it out on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts by searching on the DX Mentor. So from a contest standpoint, I know the ARL contest sheet is read elsewhere in this podcast, and the contests that I mention are sometimes redundant. However, there are a few contests that I have found to be especially useful for DXers who are trying to fill band slots or to get entities or zones in the log that may otherwise be difficult to get. Did you try out the Oceania DX contest this past weekend? That was the sideband portion. The CW contest will be held on Saturday, the 12th of October, starting at 0600 UTC. There were a lot of VKZLs and JAs on the air. It was a blast. This is the 79th running of the Oceania DX contest, and with solar conditions the way they are, we are expecting some big things from all of our contestants this year, said the host. Solar conditions are the best they have been in more than a decade, so your opportunity to make contact with stations in Oceania have never been better. We look forward to seeing all of you on the air and expect many stations from Oceania to be calling CQ contests looking for your calls. The exchange is simple. It's an RST and serial number. You can check out the WA7BNM website for more details. Until next week, this is Bill, AJB saying 7 threes, and thanks to my XYL Karen for her love and support. I hope to see you in the pile-ups.
You are listening to North America's premier news and information service for the amateur radio hobbyist. We are This Week in Amateur Radio.
Welcome to the 16th segment of Ham Radio History, a century of amateur radio. Ham's organizations, events, inventions. I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR. I want to extend our appreciation to Chris Cadella, W2PA, for allowing us to use his website in the preparation of these programs. Now here comes the next of his chapters of Ham Radio History. Strangely behaving signals. While the causes for QRM were well understood, mostly man-made, and could be dealt with through cooperation and tuning techniques, other disruptive on-air phenomena were clearly beyond such controls, those caused by nature. Some, such as static, QRN, also called strays, although understood to a large degree, had no known effective remedy. Others, such as fading, were not understood at all. At constant transmitter power, what natural phenomena could possibly cause a signal to fluctuate in strength? Why wasn't a transmitter signal strength simply determined by the distance to the receiver? One West Coast amateur who wrote to QSD about signal fading wondered if East Coast amateurs were experiencing anything similar. He cited an IRE Proceedings article, Volume 4, Number 2, that discussed the phenomenon. A Captain Bullard, who had offered a theory of a conductive layer above the Earth at an altitude that was higher in the daytime and lower at night. The IRE, the Institute of Radio Engineers, was one of the pieces that combined later to form the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers, IEEE. This might account for the stronger nighttime signals because the energy in the waves was being confined to a smaller space. He was almost right. Professor A. Hoyt Taylor held a Ph.D. in physics and had most recently taught at the universities of Wisconsin and North Dakota. He was chairman of the physics department. Also an active ham operating under a special license as 9XN, he had taken an early professional interest in radio propagation and antennas. In QST, he discussed sources of signal variations without ever using the word propagation, based on experimental results he had already published in the IRE Proceedings. Taylor would go on to be superintendent of the radio division at the Naval Research Laboratory from 1923 to 1945 and contribute to the development of radar. He was also president of the Institute of Radio Engineers, IRE, in 1929. Differences in signal behavior between day and night, summer and winter, were well known, but their origins were not. By variations, Taylor meant real-time changes in strength, often referred to as freaks or swings, and now called QSB, which were most often noticed at twilight. They were also more noticeable at long distances and short wavelengths. He therefore suggested experimenting during winter nights when long distances became more possible with short wavelengths. Taylor further observed that signals fell off with distance much faster than the inverse square law, which, applied in free space, would predict. The inverse square law states that the strength decreases with the square of the distance. For example, double the distance and the signal decreases to 1/4. The extra decrease was thought to be due to absorption by the air and ground and earthbound objects such as vegetation and buildings. Moreover, short waves at night exhibited very confusing behavior. They could be louder than would be expected with no absorption at all, then could rapidly fade to almost nothing. He concluded that this could only happen if direct waves were interfering with waves reflected by some upper layer of the atmosphere. The two path lengths would be different, and thus signals following different paths could combine at the reception point to enhance or degrade each other. During the winter of 1914-1915, he performed all-night experiments using 1,500 and 500-meter waves, expecting to find that variations observed at 1,500 would all be present at 500 too, but not the converse, given the 3-to-1 wavelength ratio. His results seemed to support that theory. He suggested additional experiments and noted something we take for granted today, that cases where the wavelengths seem to skip an intervening station are of especial interest and should be carefully noted. A number of well-proven cases are on record where signals have been more audible at, say, 700 miles than at 350 miles, the sender and two receivers all in a line. It is difficult to explain such cases except by the action of interfering reflections. Taylor concluded that freak records for distance covered were probably not a valid way to rate the effectiveness of a station, since these occurrences were haphazard exceptions rather than demonstrations of consistent or inherent capability. Other theories explained bending of waves among favorable paths, speculating about the effects of sunlight and that decreased ionization of the air at night was probably responsible for the improved propagation. They were right, but for the wrong reason. The shorter the wavelength, the greater the observed enhancement was at night. This was a hint of great things to come. Calls heard. For some time, QST had been printing lists of stations heard as reported by members around the country. Located towards the back of the magazine, at first mixed in with the letters to the editor, it was known as the Calls Heard section. Polling indicated there was very strong support for continuing the practice, many finding it quite useful in judging the effectiveness of their stations along various paths from month to month. This was a time when establishing two-way contact was itself quite challenging. Thus, just hearing another amateur signal was useful information to convey by other means, for example via QST, back to the transmitting station's owner. The editor noticed many queer things that could be inferred by these lists in regard to fading. The most prominent question was, why were stations further distant heard more reliably than ones closer in? And why could a station at the foot of a high mountain hear stations 800 miles beyond it? This made no sense at all, for waves were propagating along the ground. Noticing the effects of ionospheric propagation, amateurs did not yet understand it. A very early Calls Heard section included a letter from 16-year-old Fred Terman, misspelled Texman, in QST. Terman would later become professor of electrical engineering at Stanford University, author of seminal textbooks on radio engineering, and one of the founders of Silicon Valley. In the midst of ever-expanding range, a QST editor, probably Maxim, asked, "Where are we bound? That is, where is message relaying taking us?" Licensed amateurs were then 5,000 strong in the U.S. They held regular traffic handling schedules. Some stations had as much as $1,000 invested in their stations, equivalent to nearly $18,000 in 2013. 1,000 miles was now being covered with a kilowatt or less, using 200 to 300 meter wavelength, something newly possible for 20 or 30 of us every night. He also wondered how the presence of inexpensive or free communications, neglecting the cost of equipment between citizens, would affect the telephone business, and what new and ever better equipment and technology would result from the demand for amateur wireless apparatus. Would other countries stop suppressing amateur operation as they were doing now? Finally, he noted, and last of all, we wonder if you and I some night in the future will sit in our little room and chat with another fellow in Germany or France while we listen to what is going on between a couple of fellows, one in Brazil and the other in Honolulu. We realize this last is a pretty good wonder, but if we advance as much in the next 10 years as we have in the past 10, it will be something to confidently expect. And 9DC offered his own poetic take on propagation and pleasure in operating. As I sit here upon my hard-bottomed chair, with receptors screwed to my auditory organs, I seem to be possessed of a superhuman position. In fact, it is like flirting with spirits, chasing unimaginable demons of the firmament, and kidding the devil. Indeed, I listen to the mouth of the world give forth its grievances of a day with ears like those of a god. As the hours grow smaller, the green-shaded filament before my orbs appears to grow more subdued, but more effective with its tormenting rays. I am surrounded by the playthings of spirits. They generate a flaming liquid. It is hot. It cracks as it flows. It renders the air asunder as it passes over a non-metallic circuit, spark gap. It jumps forth from its origin upon every airline of the earth. It dies no sooner than born, but how far it has traveled in its short career, no one knows. Indeed, the most delightful and fascinating thought comes from the anticipation reaching some distant hamlet or city. 9 DC. Nearly a century later, this anticipation remains a source of delight and fascination for many hams. Included in this material are quotes from the following: L. Windsor, Radio Communications by the Amateurs, QST, June 1916, page 141. A. H. Taylor, Transmission Variations, QST, August 1916, page 189. The Propagation of Wireless Waves, QST, opening article, September 1916, page 235. Where Are We Bound? Editorial, QST, February 1917, page 36. 9 DC, QRM, Radio Communication by the Amateurs, QST, March 1917, page 45. With a tip of the TWIAR hat to Chris Cadella, W9PA, for the use of his website materials, Ham Radio History, A Century of Amateur Radio, Ham's Organizations, Events, Inventions. I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR, reporting for This Week in Amateur Radio.
You're listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available worldwide as a podcast from our web at www.twiar.net.
Bruce Page, KK5DO, is here now with this week's AMSAT report. Bruce?
Thanks, John. Another satellite is added to the list with their new Oscar number. MESAT-1 is now MESAT-1 Oscar 122, or simply MO122. Congratulations to them and their new satellite. Thanks to Drew, KO4MA, AMSAT VP of Operations, and Oscar number administrator for the news. We are awaiting news from our team on the ground in Tampa area to see if the hotel will be available for our annual symposium in just under 2 weeks. If not, then we will be doing a virtual symposium like we did during COVID. We'll see. For the latest update, visit amsat.org. As there was a major hurricane and everyone is aware of what has happened in Florida, remember that when all else fails, there's ham radio. Satellites are not the greatest in emergencies, however, they are available, and FM satellites do not require much equipment. An HT and small beam antenna for 2 meter and 70 centimeter. Changing the radio to an all-mode 2 meter and 70 centimeter will allow you to work the sideband satellites. And there is plenty of space there to have an emergency QSO. You will be limited to when the satellites pass over your location. However, something is better than nothing. Any class operator can use the satellites. This is Bruce Page, KK5DO. Back to you, John.
And thanks, Bruce, for that report.
It is time for this week's solar weather forecast with our solar prognosticator, Tad Cook, K7RA, in Seattle, Washington. Only 4 new sunspot groups emerged this week. The first was on October 4th, another on October 6th, and 2 more on October 7th. The average daily sunspot number moved from 164.7 to 160, and average daily solar flux from 213.1 to 261.3. So looking at the predicted solar flux for the near term, it will be 230, 220, 210, and 230 on October 13th through the 16th, then lower to 170 on October 17th through the 21st, then 175, 180, 185, 190, 195, 215, 230, 240, 250, and 2:55 on October 22nd through the 31st. Looking now at the predicted planetary A index for the near term reveals a value of 12 on October 13th, 5 on October 14th through the 21st, then 15, 10, 5, 5, 12, and 8 on October 22nd through the 27th, then holds steady at a value of 5 on October 28th through November 2nd.
Just ahead in radio sport this week, a lot of good contests. October 12th to the 13th, it's the Mark and Then RTTY contest. That's digital. October 12th, the QRP ARCI Fall QSO Party. That's CW. And October 12th through the 13th, the VHF UHF Nevada QSO Party, CW phone and digital. And also October 12th through the 13th, Oceania DX contest. That is CW. And make sure you visit the ARRL contest calendar for more events and more information. Upcoming Section State and Division Conventions on October 12th, the Rock Hill Hamfest sponsoring the ARRL South Carolina Section Convention. That's in Rock Hill, South Carolina. October 13th, it's the Nutmeg Hamfest sponsoring the ARRL Connecticut State Convention. That's in Meridian, Connecticut. And October 18th through the 20th, Pacificon sponsoring the ARRL Pacific Division Convention. That's in San Ramon, California.
The Voyager 2 spacecraft's energy budget keeps dropping by about 4 watts per year as the plutonium in its nuclear power source is steadily dropping as the isotope decays. With 4 watts of power less to use by its systems per year, the decision was made to disable the Plasma Spectrometer, or PLS, instrument. As also noted by the NASA Voyager 2 team on Twitter, this doesn't leave the spacecraft completely blind to plasma in the interstellar medium, as the plasma wave subsystem is still active. The PLS was instrumental in determining in 2018 that Voyager 2 had in fact left the heliosphere and entered interstellar space. The PLS on Voyager 1 had already broken down in 1980 and was turned off in 2007. After saving the Voyager 1 spacecraft the past months from a dud memory chip and switching between increasingly clogged up thrusters, it was now Voyager 2's turn for a reminder of the relentless march of time and the encroaching end of the Voyager missions. Currently, Voyager 2 still has 4 active instruments, but by the time the power runs out, they'll both be limping along with a single instrument, probably somewhere in the 2030s if their incredible luck holds. This incredible feat was enabled both by the hard work and brilliance of the generations of teams behind the 2 spacecraft, who keep coming up with new tricks to save power, and the simplicity of the radioisotope generators which keep both Voyagers powered and warm even in the depths of interstellar space.
One of the features in the recently released Super Fox version of FT8 for DXpeditions was a security key to validate the DXpedition station as being really who they say they are, and not a pirate station using their call sign. Unfortunately, this security has been cracked, enabling stations to claim that they are a rare DXpedition station, and those people working them are disappointed when they find out they didn't work the DXpedition station at all. Why do stations pirate others' call signs? Just to cause trouble? Well, one reason has been put forward for the code being cracked is the fact that valid DXpeditions have been refused the needed security key to run SuperVox mode, which also allows many more stations to be worked in parallel when compared to normal FT8. These keys are not managed by the WSJT group, but rather by the Northern California DX Foundation. And it's been suggested in the article that their refusal to issue keys to some requesters devalue those DXpedition groups' chances of maximum contact numbers in the FT8 mode. The WSJTX groups are working to increase key security, but one would hope that the key allocation would be performed by an international independent body, rather than one involved in running and sponsoring DXpeditions, to avoid the current accusations.
The ARRL Teachers Institute on Wireless Technology is wrapping up its final cohort for 2024. John Ross, KD8IDJ, is here with more.
8 educators from across the country have gathered at ARRL headquarters in Newington, Connecticut this week to learn how to incorporate radio technology into their lessons. 85 educators have gotten hands-on with radio technology through the program in 2024. On Thursday, October 10th, as Hurricane Milton's remnants continued to roar across Florida, the group decoded GOES satellite images of the storm. As the decoded signals were converted to images, there were exclamations of amazement in the conference room that serves as the training center. "Wow," said several teachers, almost in unison. Lisa Werner, KE8BMR of Muckawanago, Wisconsin, earned her technician class license during the week at TI. Experiences like the weather satellite decode opened her eyes to the broad possibilities of amateur radio. "I learned all the different things that can be done with ham radio. I thought it was just talking on the radio before coming to TI," she said. Radio is central to TI, but the goal isn't just to create more hams. It is really about getting radio and radio technology back into the front of mind for students, said ARRL Education and Learning Manager Steve Goodgame, K5ATA. By incorporating radio into science, technology, engineering, and mathematics STEM lessons, the importance of radio communications in all aspects of modern and future life is demonstrated for generations that could take humans to Mars and beyond. We're excited for the future, and especially for the future of the ARRL Teachers Institute on Wireless Technology, said Goodgame. 2025 will be a strong year of growth for the program. We've continued to improve on our strong foundation, and groups like this cohort give us a lot of energy to look forward. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
The ARRL Teachers Institute on Wireless Technology is funded entirely by donations to the ARRL Education and Technology Fund. In the last 3 years, 175 educators have attended the Teachers Institute. There are 7 cohorts of the program in 2024, and the goal is to scale it to 16 for 2025, including taking the Institute on the road to different cities around the country.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available to download as a podcast from anywhere on the web podcasts are available.
Foundations of Amateur Radio. The other day I was packing the car to go on a little trip an hour out of the city to see the Milky Way. I briefly entertained the idea of bringing my radio gear with me to get on air to make some noise. I resisted the urge, mainly because thinking about this didn't fill me with joy. Rather, it made me groan. Now, to be absolutely clear, I adore going out into the scrub with my radio gear. I love getting on air and making noise. I like doing this with friends. If the time spent is about amateur radio, in other words, if I'm doing this with other amateurs, preparation and setup are part of the experience. However, if I'm on my own or with my non-amateur SO, significant other, then preparation and setup often take more time than the actual on-air activity. And by the time that things are humming along, we're ready to do something else. Fine food, nice view, coffee, you name it, anything other than radio. So, how can I make the preparation and setup to be something much less time-consuming? I don't really want to take over our car and bolt the radio back into it, nor do I want to strap a multi-tap antenna to the roof. At the other end, I also have no desire to bring a wire, look for a tree, do some throwing, find a place to sit and do the rest of the preparation to get on air. In other words, I want my cake and eat it too. What might that look like? One of my fellow amateurs has a telescopic whip, looks like a transistor radio antenna on steroids, but using that requires that you bring something to tune it, given that the ground is going to influence the antenna in unexpected ways. I could go out and buy a QRP radio with an inbuilt tuner, make the whip as long as it goes, perhaps even make it into a vertical dipole by combining two, and start playing, but I'm not there yet. Of course, I'm not the first to try any of this. The Parks on the Air and Summits on the Air activators are all over this type of activity. Hopefully they've written some of their learnings down. I confess that I haven't found anything yet. How much of this have you achieved? What compromises did you make? What modes do you use when you're operating like this? Mind you, I can hear my friend Charles, November Kilo 8 Oscar, from here. Use more, Sono. so I can take that as a given. All I need to do is learn it. I'm on a Victor Kilo 6 Foxtrot Lima Alpha Bravo.
ARIS is planning a slow-scan television experiment from the International Space Station scheduled to start on Tuesday, October 8th at 1600 GMT and running until Monday, October 14th at 1410 GMT. There will be an interruption on Friday, October 11th for planned school contacts over Europe. The transmission frequency will be 145.800 MHz FM using SSTV mode PD120. The ISS call sign will be RS0ISS. The SSTV transmissions will be made using the station in the Russian ISS service module. The equipment used is a Kenwood D710 transceiver running about 25 watts output, which provides a very strong signal, enabling reception using simple equipment. Amateurs can receive the SSTV pictures directly from the space station by connecting the audio output of their 2-meter transceiver via simple interface to the sound card on a Windows PC or an Apple iOS device. On Windows PCs, the free application MMSSTV can be used to decode the signal. On Apple iOS devices, you can use the SSTV app for compatible modes. For Linux systems, try QSS-TV. The ISS puts out a strong signal, so even a 2-meter handheld with a quarter-wave antenna will be enough to receive it, but one's chances of success are significantly improved with the use of a handheld beam antenna. The FM transmission uses 5 kHz deviation, which is standard in much of the world. Many FM rigs can be switched between wide and narrow deviation FM filters. For best results, you should select the filter for wider deviation FM. Handhelds all seem to have a single wide filter fitted as standard. Reports are requested. Please send ARIS your decoded pictures in the official ARIS SSTV gallery at spaceflightsoftware.com/ARIS_SSTV.
Keys Van Osprey, W0AAE, received the 2024 Hiram Percy Maximum Memorial Award during the ARRL Forum at the North Star Radio Convention, which hosted the ARRL Minnesota State Convention in Brooklyn Park, Minnesota on Saturday, October 5th, 2024. Van Osprey is an active member of the amateur radio community in Minnesota and at Iowa State University, where he is a treasurer of the university's radio club. He is an active in the Minnesota Wireless Association and is regularly on the air with SSB, CW, RTTY, and other digital modes. In 2020, Van Osprey was part of the remote ham radio team that put NU1AW on the air for the IARU HF contest. In January 2024, he operated in the NAQP SSB contest in the single-op low-power assisted category, making over 1,000 contacts in under 9 hours. The Hiram Percy Maximum Memorial Award consists of a $1,500 cash award and an engraved plaque and is given annually to a licensed radio amateur under the age of 21. The awardee, who must be a current ARRL member, is recognized for their exemplary accomplishments and contributions to the community of amateur radio and the local community. The Hiram Percy Maximum was an early 20th century industrialist and inventor who founded the ARRL as the American Radio Relay League in 1914. ARRL also supports youth involvement in radio and radio technology through the ARRL Youth Membership, the ARRL Teachers Institute on Wireless Technology, and by awarding $725,000 in scholarships each year. Visit www.arrl.org for more information.
It's time once again for AMSAT satellite shorts from all over, and we begin this week with news from SpaceX. SpaceX is pausing its Falcon 9 launches again after the upper stage on the Crew 9 launch experienced an off-nominal deorbit burn that led to missing its expected landing zone in the ocean. Crew 9, along with its 2 empty seats for stranded astronauts Williams and Wilmore, successfully reached the ISS without issue. Next up is news about the 2025 SmallSat Conference. It's going to be scheduled for August 11th through the 13th, 2025, at the Salt Palace Convention Center in Salt Lake City, Utah. The theme for the conference is Reaching New Horizons and a New Orbit. Same mission, innovation and growing demand are driving the increased use of small satellites across a diverse global ecosystem. Both government and commercial sectors are pursuing proliferated networked constellations for global monitoring and connectivity. National space agencies and academia use small satellites for exploration, science, and fundamental research. The conference organizers have put out the first call for papers and for exhibitors. Abstracts are due by February 4th, 11:59 p.m. Mountain Time. More information is available on the web at smallsat.org. And finally this week, for those who missed the 2024 CubeSat Developers Workshop at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, California, last April, all recorded presentations are now available for viewing on YouTube. CPCL is Cal Poly's CubeSat laboratory, where the CubeSat standard originated and where the CubeSat design specification is maintained and published. In addition to providing the CDS, CPCL hosts the annual CubeSat Developers Workshop in San Luis Obispo and provides a central point for CubeSat community resources.
As many as 50 licensed amateurs between the ages of 15 and 25 will be headed for Colorado next June as the Youth on the Air Camp for Americas enters its 5th season. The online application period begins December 1 and is open to young radio operators from North, Central, and South America. The camp will take place from June 15 through the 20th. Prospective campers living outside the U.S. are being given priority and are encouraged to leave sufficient time to obtain the required passport and tourist visa. First-time campers are also given priority. Attendees from past years are welcome to apply to serve as leaders. Meanwhile, plans are in the works to inaugurate 2 other camp experiences next year, sub-regional camps and a YOTA Junior USA camp serving hams younger than 15. Visit theyouthontheair.org. That's youthontheair, all one word, .org. For additional information, please contact Camp Director Neil Rapp, WB9VPG, via the email address director@youthontheair.org.
We pause for stations along the network to identify. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, available as a direct download on our website at www.twiar.net.
NASA is set to launch the Europa Clipper mission, a groundbreaking effort to explore Jupiter's icy moon Europa. Slated for liftoff as early as October 10, 2024, the spacecraft will be carried into space by a SpaceX Falcon Heavy rocket from Kennedy Space Center in Florida. The mission aims to uncover the mysteries of Europa's hidden ocean and assess whether the moon could host conditions favorable for life. Europa's Clipper journey will take 6 years to reach the Jupiter system. Once there, it will enter an orbit around Jupiter, performing dozens of flybys of Europa. The spacecraft's suite of instruments will probe beneath the moon's icy shell to study its subsurface ocean. By mapping the moon and investigating its potential habitability, NASA hopes to shed light on one of the most intriguing questions in planetary science: whether life could exist on other worlds. The mission is significant because Europa is thought to possess all the ingredients necessary for life. Beneath its thick ice lies a vast, salty ocean, which may contain more water than all of Earth's oceans combined. The moon's subsurface environment could offer the energy, liquid water, and organic compounds required to support life. Although Europa is smaller than Earth's moon, its potential to harbor a habitable environment makes it a prime target for exploration. To reach Jupiter, Europa Clipper will rely on 2 gravity assists. In 2025, it will pass within 1,000 kilometers of Mars to adjust its trajectory, followed by a close flyby of Earth in 2026. These maneuvers will boost the spacecraft's speed and guide it toward the Jupiter system, where it is expected to arrive in 2030. Instead of orbiting Europa directly, the spacecraft will remain in orbit around Jupiter, occasionally dipping into the planet's intense radiation field for close encounters with Europa. Once in the Jupiter system, Europa Clipper will conduct over 40 flybys of Europa, approaching as close as 25 kilometers above its surface. The spacecraft's instruments are designed to withstand the harsh radiation environment, with most being housed in a protective radiation vault. Each flyby will gather detailed data, providing new insights into the Moon's ice-covered ocean and the possibility of life beneath its surface. The spacecraft's science instruments include ice-penetrating radar to map Europa's icy shell and magnetic sensors to confirm the presence of its ocean. High-resolution cameras and spectrometers will analyze the Moon's surface and search for water vapor plumes that may erupt from below. Although Europa Clipper is not officially a life detection mission, it promises to transform our understanding of habitability beyond Earth.
From the very beginning, radio was almost certain to be in the future for Jovan Bojdani, ZA1H. He grew up watching his father at the helm of Radio Tirana, Albania's first broadcast radio station, which transmitted its powerful signal on 7050 kilohertz. Jovan's own history-making involvement in radio came with the creation of the Albanian Amateur Radio Association, which he served in as secretary. Jovan had been one of the first students to be trained in the ZA1A IARU amateur radio program in 1989 in preparation for amateur radio's reintroduction into Albania the following year. Notices posted on a variety of DX websites praised Jovan's efforts to welcome international operators to Albania and to provide whatever guidance he could to local hams. A note posted on DX News said that Jovan worked tirelessly to unite competing amateur radio groups in Albania, though sadly he did not live to see the fruits of his efforts. Details about the date and cause of his death were not available.
Astronomers have uncovered something pretty remarkable emerging from the depths of space after detecting a powerful series of radio waves. The signal, known as FRB 2022-0610A, is made up of dazzling radio wave flashes that last just milliseconds at a time. What makes them truly astonishing is that these radio waves have been traveling through space for a total of 8 billion years, and it could help experts to gain a better understanding of one of the great mysteries of the universe. These signals could theoretically help astronomers to put together a more comprehensive understanding of the universe. One of the people involved in the research is astronomer Dave Stewart Ryder from Macquarie University in Australia. He said FRBs are common and hold great promise. We could use them to create a new map of the universe structure and answer big questions in cosmology. The strength of the newly observed signal is truly staggering, with FRB 2022-0610A emitting the same amount of energy that our sun produces in 30 years in the space in just a few milliseconds.
Following meetings with contest directors and Worldwide Radio Operators Foundation leadership, the organizers of CQ Worldwide contests have restored eligibility for awards to qualifying amateurs from Russia and Belarus. That policy change took effect during the weekend of the CQ Worldwide or TTY contest, which took place on the 28th and 29th of September. CQ Worldwide contest director John Dorr, K1AR, announced on the contest blog that the elimination of those operators' eligibility for award plaques, a decision made 2 years ago, was never formally incorporated into any contest rules. It was merely a policy statement. That policy is no longer in effect, bringing the contests into alignment with so many other competitions around the world.
The South African Radio League, in partnership with AMSAT SA, will exhibit at the annual South African Science Forum to be held at the CSIR Conference Center in Pretoria in December. The focus of the SARL AMSAT SA exhibit will be science and technology in amateur radio. The SARL AMSAT SA participation is being facilitated by Brian Jacobs, ZS6YZ, and Hans van Groendaal, ZS6AKV. We are inviting radio amateurs who are involved in science and technology projects featuring amateur radio to consider participating in the event and have their projects included on the SARL AMSAT SA stand, Brian Jacobs said. We are particularly interested in projects involving learners and students.
On July 4th, 2024, at 4:04 UTC, the MESAT-1 satellite was launched on a Firefly Alpha launch vehicle from Vandenberg Space Force Base in California. Developed by the University of Maine, the satellite carries an Earth imaging experiment and an AMSAT-provided LTM-1 linear transponder to provide services to amateur radio enthusiasts around the world. The satellite has been commissioned and the transponder is currently active. At the request of the University of Maine, AMSAT hereby designates MESAT-1 as MESAT-1-Oscar 122, or also MO-122. We congratulate the University of Maine, thank them for their contribution to the amateur satellite community, and wish them some continued success on this and future projects.
In Puerto Rico, the site where the iconic Arecibo radio telescope once stood is being ready for a new role in the world of science. Now entitled Arecibo C3, the U.S. National Science Foundation's Educational Science Center is preparing for a full opening soon at the site where the legendary Arecibo Observatory reigned until damages suffered in 2020 compelled the radio telescope's dismantling. The new facility in Puerto Rico is formally known as the NSF Arecibo Center for Culturally Relevant and Inclusive Science Education, Computational Skills, and Community Engagement. According to its website, the center is building on the legacy of the radio telescope, serving as an epicenter of STEM education research and skill building. Conferences, meetings, and workshops will be held there, along with public science programs. An assistant director of the Science Foundation, James L. Moore III, said in a public statement that the center will embrace all ranges of science, from astronomy and radio science to biology, computer science, and natural science. Students and educators visited the center this past summer to attend some of the programs that were launched on a pilot basis.
Now, in our 25th year of service to the worldwide amateur radio community, you are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio.
The suffering of a man separated from his family was amplified by the agony of having just endured the amputation of his left leg, the result of an apparent accident near the Sodapur and Agapara railway station tracks in West Bengal, India. Authorities were not clear how the man had become injured, but following his surgery at the Sagar Dutta Medical College and Hospital, they knew they could at least help heal one part of his pain, his sense of isolation, and the onset of depression. While the man recovered physically, the hospital superintendent sought help to get him family support. On September 26th, the hospital official, Zahid Hossain, contacted the West Bengal Radio Club, an amateur radio organization with a proven track record of helping in missing persons cases. According to a report in the Millennium Post, the Hams used their vast network of contacts to locate the man's family in the West Bengal district of Birbhum. The club secretary, Ambaris Naj Biswa, VU2 JVA, told the newspaper that when the Hams got in touch with the man's elder sister, they learned that she had reported him missing about a year ago. The siblings were put in touch with one another, and the man recognized his sister. When he was considered healthy enough to be released by the hospital, he returned home with her to the family's village.
As part of their efforts to promote amateur radio and STEM careers among women in India, Sister Navidadal University and Oscar India, a program of the All India School of Management and Information Technology, spent a day exploring the value that involvement in radio can bring to women's lives. The all-day seminar, held on September 30th on the University Kolkata campus, placed a special emphasis on radio communication, vital role in ensuring women's security. Undergraduates enrolled in the university's mass communication and engineering departments were given an opportunity for hands-on experience with radio equipment, especially gear used in emergencies. Oscar India's convener, Nikantha Chatterjee, VU2OII, shared a sample of the voice-over IP-based communication, traditional radio modes, and Morse code. Oscar India, which has conducted training seminars across 20 states and India during the last 8 years, has placed a greater emphasis in its recent programs on young women using radios. The organization, whose name is an acronym for an open source convention for amateur radio, is encouraging young women in particular to use ham radio as a gateway for greater personal security. These seminars are designed to increase understanding of technology and general societal well-being through radio connections.
And finally this week, the Radio Club of Tacoma cordially invites all radio amateurs around the world to seek out the elusive Bigfoot on the airwaves of the Pacific Northwest in celebration of National Sasquatch Awareness Day, October 20th. We are sure there will be multiple sightings of the Bigfoot special event stations, but the challenge will be to contact W7B, W7I, W7G, W7F, and W7O. Participants must work W7O at least twice on 2 different modes, bands, or Zulu days, and W7T to claim the coveted full stomp on the Bigfoot certificate. Anyone can apply for the certificate, but if you only work one of the stations, it's probably best just to request the QSL card. If you work more than one station, it's best to apply for the certificate and you will receive the QSL card as well for the first of the stations you worked. Radio Club of Tacoma W7DK club members will be operating the Bigfoot call signs starting on October 16th at 0000 Zulu. And the special event will end on October 21st at 2359 Zulu. Stations will be using CW, phone, FT8, and FT4, RIDI, and PSK modes, and will be operating on 80, 40, 20, 15, and 10 meters at various times throughout each day. Everyone working the event station can request an event QSL card by sending your QSL card and a self-addressed stamped envelope, or send a check or money order for $5 if you wish the full certificate. Those operators who work all of the special event stations will get a stamp for the full stomp.
This Week in Amateur Radio is holding open auditions for news anchors for the weekly national worldwide amateur radio news service. If you have a good radio voice and can reliably read provided news copy, we are looking for you. This, of course, is an all-volunteer position. An amateur radio license is not required. You must have a high-quality microphone, headset mics are not used, and be familiar with audio editing software to record and edit your finished news stories before uploading. If you would like to try out for a weekly or bi-weekly anchor position with North America's premier amateur radio news on air and podcast, please send an email to our producer, George, W2XBS. You can include a sample MP3 of yourself reading news copy sent as an attachment to W2XBS77@gmail.com. That's whiskey, the number 2, X-ray Bravo Sierra 77@gmail.com. Be sure and use Anchor Audition in the subject line. Please include your phone number and a good window of time for a callback to discuss your submission and our operating logistics to see if This Week in Amateur Radio is a good fit for you. We hope to hear from you soon. This Week in Amateur Radio is streamed on the internet, broadcast on low-power FM, and heard on nets and repeaters all around the world, like the K2IWR repeater operated by the Skyline Amateur Radio Club on 147.180 MHz in Cortland, New York, where This Week in Amateur Radio is heard each Tuesday evening at 8:30 p.m. Eastern. If you would like to have your club's repeater announced on This Week in Amateur Radio, send us an email with all the pertinent information to w2xbs77@gmail.com. Many of the news and information items heard in this edition of This Week in Amateur Radio have been provided by the American Radio Relay League, the ARRL Audio News Service, and the ARRL Letter, AMSAT, the Radio Amateurs of Canada, the Shortwave Listening Post, the Federal Communications Commission, the Radio Society of Great Britain, and Ofcom, the South African Radio League, the International Amateur Radio Union, the Wireless Institute of Australia, and the Australian Communications and Media Authority, the New Zealand Association of Radio Transmitters, the Amateur Radio Newsline, the Rain Hamcast, Eric Guth, 4Z1UG and QSO Today, QRZ.com, the International Telecommunications Union, the 425DX News, Parks on the Air, and the Soda Reflector, and various news sources on the Internet.
With special thanks to all our weekly news sources and to you, our listeners, that wraps up this edition of This Week in Amateur Radio. If you would like to write to us, you can find everything you need, including archive editions of the news service, at our website at twiar.net. And now, for all of us at This Week in Amateur Radio headquarters and all our news team around the world, this is Will Rogers, K5WLR in Fayetteville, Arkansas, wishing you 73.